You as well? Yeah, not too much, unfortunately. I only had about a day and a half, maybe to 2 days to actually get in with it. Um, so I got in. It was kind of a mishmash of a lot of the statements he had made prior. So it wasn't really a surprise when I got about couple way in. Yeah. No, no, no. You're not. It's kind of reading two books at the same time. I always feel that he's trying to speak in a plain voice so that way he can hit the mass audience, or at least get as many people who traditionally follow him. Which, although he speaks, like, whenever you read his work on, like, the Vox Populi blog, whenever you read his blogs, like, he comes across as incredibly an intelligent guy. I'm not gonna sit here and say that he's dumb, because under no circumstance is he. On the other hand, I feel that when he, just like yourself, actually, I merit this on you as well, is that when you speak, you're trying to get the message out to as many people as possible, but you have a really hard time dumbing down your speech to that degree, and then it'll come out at random points. But I think for him, I think it's the exact opposite, where I feel that he standardly has a very almost Steve Bannon mannerism, where he speaks in the plain language, but he has to prove himself and his intelligence by speaking in a manner that's kind of foreign to him, and so it comes out in random spots, and he doesn't know how to really finagle it into the overall theme of the book, or the or the kind of chapter or topic he's talking about. So that's where I always kind of struggle reading with him, because it's kind of, if you were reading, like, if you're reading the middle of the Constitution, and suddenly, like, you see that one girl from Yo, Catch Me Outside, how about that? Like, if it pops in, like, on the Sixth Amendment, that would really be shocking. It's like, where the hell did this come from? And that's what I kind of get the feeling when it comes to Vox Day. Yeah. So, yeah, because whenever I'm on his blog, like I don't go to his blog frequently. There's a lot of things that I kind of disagree with him on, and I was kind of saying this before we kind of got into this, is that there are a lot of things that I disagree with him on. So more often than not, I kind of tend to dismiss Vox a lot. I'm probably going to miss a lot of the hidden gems. Uh, but like more often when I see some of his like his opinions on kind of Ron Paul, when I look at his stuff on like he really looks at what is his name, Reed and Molyneux and a couple other things like that. Um, it just kind of I don't know what it is about Vox Day that I don't really see eye to eye on with him. And I think it a lot of it. You and I have had this kind of talk before. I think it comes down to a lot of his emphasis on a lot of misunderstandings in economics as well as Judaism and Jews in general. So the Jewish question has always perplexed me. I don't understand why. You and I have gone over this like time again. I actually, yeah, absolutely. And don't get me wrong, like I think it rolls down to a lot of their culture is very foreign. It's very not kind of copy paste from a lot of the other cultures. It stands out in a huge fashion, and it seems almost uh, unnecessary suffrage. Uh, so, and that tradition, like this, I look at them the same way as I look at the Incans, where like, okay, you're cutting the heart out of someone every single day to make the sun rise. That's that kind of throws us off, and like that seems really foreign to us. So think of that in a modern day sense, and that doesn't really fit in the mainstream, and that kicks us into high gear. We're incredibly suspect of them. Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, like I'm not going to accuse him of anti-Semitism. I don't I've read too much. Like I'm always wary of calling people anti-Semites because there's a lot of genuine criticism of Jewish culture and Jewish belief systems and customs that they hold. There's a lot of places to criticize without being an anti-Semite. It's the same thing with being, and I hate to use this word because it irritates the hell out of me, but Islamophobic, because that's not the word you should be using to address this kind of criticism. And I think Christopher Hitchens hit on that extremely well. But I'm always weary of calling someone an anti-Semite because more often than not, criticism of Judeo culture is not necessarily coming from a place of anti-Semitism, but simply a critique of their cultures fitting into the mainstream. Like, uh, I believe it's the mullah who, like, when they do a circumcision, where they'll suck the head of the penis into their mouth and split it into a holy vase. It's like that's okay. I don't think it's necessary, and I think it's horrible, in fact, for a 50, 60, 70-year-old man to suck on a little baby boy's dick just to get the blood off, and then like that doesn't make it any more holy. That doesn't make it any more sanctified. In fact, the likelihood that you've just given that kid herpes is pretty high, including I think it's what 45 kids have been diagnosed and killed by herpes in the last 15 years. Yeah, yeah, and I think that's a failure and a breakdown of communication. And I think it's because we're so used to the left jumping onto like, oh well, you think that we should have conservative values and not spend every single piece of money that we have on drug programs and giving needles to homeless people. Well, good. That means that you're Hitler incarnate. Oh well, that came out of nowhere. But I think that there's when I'm talking about his focus on Jews not being an anti-Semitic issue, I remember there was one of his blogs that I read a while back on Jordan Peterson, and it was talking about Jordan Peterson's integrity or his honesty, and it was talking about he basically went into Jordan Peterson on being disingenuous or dishonest, basically only focusing on Jewish intelligence and Jewish culture and Jewish collectivism and their propensity to be collectivized in like specific fields. That's that's where when you focus so much on discrediting somewhat, like when you write an entire blog in order to discredit someone's integrity based nearly solely on the credit of measuring Jewish intelligence, Jewish propensity to be in specific career fields, and a whole bunch of those things like that. That seems to focus so heavily. It almost falls on the merit of one doth protest too much, and and I remember that was during an interview that he had. It was on a panel that he had pretty much dismissed the question that he was asked from the audience, right? Okay, I believe I remember him even linking the video into it, where the audience member literally asked him, like, "Well, what about the Jewish question due to intelligence and their being in primary banking and movie industries and high yield kind of fields? What say you on that matter?" And then he just pretty much dismissed it, and then kind of yeah. Next question. But he also said like a couple disingenuous things. I'll agree with Vox Dei on that, where he dismisses a couple things and then moves on by just simply going, "Well, it's not true. Like, it's all about IQ, and IQ, they actually have higher intelligence levels." And then I remember Vox Day goes on and on and on about how, well, that's not actually true. Yep. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, like I remember reading a lot of these in his blog, and I remember going through a lot of those studies. The only problem that I keep running into is the fact that there's a difference between a study and I kind of pointed this out a while back, which was one reason why I started to dismiss a lot of his arguments, which was, although yes, there are studies, I will always agree with him, there are studies, but a lot of these are not widely accepted studies. These are not peer reviewed. Some of these are not even peer reviewed studies. And in the modern day academia, it's really hard. And I agree, yes, modern day academia is incredibly horrible. I will agree with that 100% of the time. Uh, but I think there has to be a median ground or a medium ground between uh, no academia can be trusted, period, ever, get rid of it, and we have to take them their word as God. Yeah, and the experts are always right. And I think where he's coming from is, I think Jordan Peterson is not necessarily lying. I think since the vast majority of academic studies are actually do state, yes, Jews do have a higher than average IQ. Here's the studies. This and there's not a lot of like let's just basically grill Jews about how intelligent they are. I don't think that there's a lot of clamor for that kind of study. In which case, the findings are going to be rather limited. I think that the more widely accepted academia is going off of specific studies that favor the idea that Jews have a higher than average intelligence, in which case that would favor the idea that they're going to be uh, more capable of going into these high yield jobs and careers, and couple that with a high in-group preference, you're more than likely going to see large collection and groups of high intelligence people in these high yield kind of careers. And I think that instead of focusing on like, well, he's disingenuous and he lies because here's a study, it's really hard to go off of that instead of you have a different set of knowledge or you have a different report that contradicts it. Because when the reason that this kicked off in my brain a little while ago, when I think it kicked off like a month and a half after he wrote that blog, I was watching a debate. No, actually, no. It was when I went to go see Dave Rubin. Okay, he and somebody else in the audience. One was super far left. Dave Rubin is like right of center now. They started arguing about the privatization of the post office, and they start bickering back and forth about it's like, well, do you think the Amazon could do better than the post office? And Dave Rubin was like, no, I think Amazon could absolutely do better than the post office. The leftist is like, oh, I think we need the post office. I'm like, do you both fuckers not know that the post office was privatized back in like the 1990s? Like, like, why are, like, this is watching two bald men fighting over a comb. Trust me, I would see the difference. Like, why in the fuck are you arguing about this? No, neither one of you are correct. It's been privatized. The fuck is wrong with you? A lot of people like it is privatized with a very significantly heavy governmental stipend and governmental subsidy. And if you go through the history of the post office, this is absolutely correct. Feel free, like fact check the shit out of me. I encourage you to do so. I would welcome it. But what people don't really get is like, okay, why are you arguing over this set of data when overtly you guys are, there's more often than not just simply wrong information. Like you have right information over here. He has information that's backed up and multiple people have cited in a peer-reviewed source. That doesn't necessarily mean he's lying, disingenuous, or dishonest. That means that he is utilizing a different form of information than you are. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yep. What? Which one? No, it wouldn't. I would agree. Yeah. 13 days. Yeah. Yeah. Didn't the guy die after 13 days or something? Yeah, it's not. It's. I remember him actually claiming that in the book. Is that actually kind of threw me as odd? The 12 rules for life, antidote to chaos, is the way that he puts it in the book is pretty much. Hey, knock it off. No, it's coming. Yeah, well, is actually talking about like anything that gives you an exuberant amount of guilt is lying. And comparatively to like saying something that's dishonest, if I were to say like, yeah, I've read all of Vox Dei's work and all of Jordanetics, like I would be lying. It doesn't make me feel guilty because I'm not a huge fan of Vox Dei, and I don't think that you would really care that much, even if I did lie. I think you'd pretty much dismiss it as like, all right, whatever. But it's still dishonest. It's still untrue statement. It's still a lie. Uh, and I think that that's where I think Jordan Peterson kind of goes into the whole like academia speak. I don't personally like. I have never really invested myself so much into Jordan Peterson where I'm going to fact check every single thing he says. I normally take it just like I took the Bible, where it's like good things I'll take, bad things I just dismiss. Um, oh yeah, it's not. Don't get me wrong, but like you already know me full well as being an atheist. Okay. Now we also know what Vox Day thinks about atheism. He thinks that we basically have a mental disorder. Um, that's always fun. Uh, yes, it's what is he called? Dawkins syndrome. I think that's what he calls it. Um, yeah, we already know that. But me being an atheist is where I focus more when it comes to biblical text. I've read it. I studied it. I don't necessarily dismiss it. I actually criticize it more often than not because I don't think that those who are I think there has to be a huge line divided between the work itself and those who claim to represent it. Because more often than not, you already know full well that those who are in the Christian line of view, they tend to be very hypocritical. They tend to be actually worse than a lot of the people who I find they're less religious. Uh, absolutely. That's disingenuous. That is a near a straw man. Okay, I'll give you more credit because that's nearing a straw man argument. Okay, because we don't care if they say that hey we're going to pray 7 times and I only prayed 5. I care more about the thing of like pretty much being a good person than you going off and raping children, um, which does happen. So so those like and then of course like causing like not causing harm to people, and then of course having a practice where you specific like the leader of the church hides child abusers, systemically hide child abusers. You literally use the power of the Vatican to grant protection to sex abusers against children by utilizing the power of the pontiff and the power of and the in the faith of God from the vast majority of especially the Latin world where they are a heavy believing set of people, and you're going to basically condemn them under the eyes of God if they don't let the priest have sex with children. Uh, so we're not doing like, hey, you're being hypocritical because you don't pray enough. No, we're saying you're hypocritical because you rape kids. Like and So yeah, go ahead and plug it. Feel free. Yeah. So, and I just want to make sure that like you and I are always on great ground with each other, where it's like that's I don't think that was an intended to be a disingenuous argument. So yeah, 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 yeah. No, not really. No, no. It, and see, this is where the disagreement over the church, and again, that's why I always drive a hard line between the work itself and not trying to judge people of the standards at the time comparatively to now, which is the same criticism I try to reserve when it comes to the destruction of the Confederate statues argument. I don't condemn those who were in biblical days for their use of slavery. I don't use it for having sex with people who are like 13 years old, 12, 13 years old, because that's when normally puberty hits and that's when someone's considered a woman. I don't condemn them for those ideals. I don't. I don't. I think it would be ridiculous, and I think it would be a double standard. On the other, yeah, yeah, ex post facto law. So, and that's basically mean, yeah, there's a law that was passed after the fact. They can't be charged for a law after for that they violated prior to the law being passed. So, um, which when I try to divide those lines of what is the moral standard, I also have this weird, and this might go into a kind of divergence into a political philosophical topic, is trying to make sure that I want to say this correctly. This is a huge criticism for the atheist community as well. Okay, I do not like the atheist community. I think they're a whole bunch of degenerate fucking assholes more often than not. I do. And you've even heard this criticism before. Is more often than not they think too big of themselves. They suck their own dick more often than I can even think of. Uh, I know, right? they but they continuously push themselves into the limelight of like, oh, look how smart I am compared to these idiots who believe in God. And and they kind of look down the nose of towards people who still believe. So that's where me and the atheist community kind of separate, and me from the religious community really separate. Is I think with one, they do not hold a monopoly on morality. They don't. And I'm going to steal that phrase from Christopher Hitchens, because you know I like to suck his dick all the time. Uh, I know, right? Plug his book. Well, he's dead, so I can't really do that anymore. He's, but they do not have a monopoly on morality. I've seen many, 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 and this isn't just subjective. There are millions of people who are good without God. Okay, there are millions of people who are good with God. There are millions of people who are bad with God. Okay, and that being said, when it comes down to being good or being evil, if you want to use the term, or immoral, I also want to steer away from the idea that the law is our sense of morality, in which we should avoid at all costs. We should never view the law as our moral guidance. Yep. Yeah. No, I don't think so. But the reason that I try to steer away from the idea that the law should be our moral guidance, because I mean, we can easily look back. You and I are both students of history. You and I can look back and name at least probably 100 laws almost off the top of our head that is, by today's standard and almost by an objective standard of morality, just absolutely atrocious. In what, like, even one is slavery. No, you should be able to do that as you see fit. You should also be able to burn the flag if you want, because that's literally the entire freedom that that flag represents. Is Yeah. Well, it's supposed to be done in a ceremonious fashion, but I agree. The but but the reason for it, because I've been reading a lot of Giovanni Gentili. I'm sure you've read him well before I have. Um, really? So, well, that's not a catch up. This is about, oh God, about 100 years old now. Giovanni Gentili, if you don't know who he is, do you know who he is? Just off the top of my head. Cool. So he's actually the founder of fascism. Yeah, he's actually the philosopher who actually coined the term, actually created the belief system, and went into what it means to be an actual fascist. Okay, and a lot of that has to do with that there is a guidance of the state. The state is an independent being outside of the populace. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, absolutely. I'll admit that I've kind of gotten away from Sargon for a while now. I should probably get back to him. Um, I agree, but I kind of got bored of the thinkery where he's just doing the meme stuff. But and I think it's a lot more important to have a genuine philosophical and political work being done, and not just like laughing at all the morons doing stupid things. And I think that's why I've become more of a fan of Steve Bannon. So uh, it's because he's actually going out there doing the legwork, him forming the movement, and I've been following the rise of Europeans' populist movement to a huge degree. And the reason I started going into Giovanni Gentili is because I was really researching a lot of what Steve Bannon was saying, and I kept hearing he's a fascist, he's a fascist, he's a fascist. And every single time that I keep hearing this, it's normally coming from the left, who I generally, at this point, especially if it's coming from a mob, I dismiss. But I dismiss a lot of things. I should probably stop doing that. But maybe it's the fact that I hear it so often that I start to dismiss things. But when I kept hearing that he was a fascist, especially one that was from Oxford last week, they basically called him a fascist to his face. And I started like, you know what, I'm really gonna get into this. I had started reading it after an interview that he had with, God, who was it? I can't remember off the top of my head. I'll have to look it up for you. But there was an interview that he did that I've been following for a while now. It was about an hour plus long that he did a great job on, and they basically called him out as a fascist to his face. And then he described what a fascist is. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to double check this. So I went into Giovanni Gentili, the actual exploits of Mussolini, as well as modern day fascists that we know of who were fascists but didn't really put a lot of philosophy into it, such as, of course, Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin. So when I look at what they did comparatively to what Steve Bannon and what they're trying to push for Trump and the nationalism from Matteo Salvini over in Italy, as well as Geert Wilders over in Denmark and Nigel Farage from UKIP, like none of these in any capacity would be ever measured as fascist. But one thing that keeps crawling up in my reading of fascism is explicitly the idea that the state is the moral guidance of the country. And that's why I keep seeing in the atheist community, to kind of circle it back to what we were talking about at the beginning, is the fact that the atheist community, for some reason, sees the state now as a moral guider, not like the epitome of moral guidance, but I don't know how to describe it. The state is the guider of morality. It's the one who should be pointing us, not as the head, but at least in the general good direction in the manner of which we should go. And I see more often than not that's not only wrong, but horribly wrong, completely out of left field, when we have laws saying that you're not even allowed to collect rainwater. It has nothing to do with morality. You're just creating laws to be able to tax people. So, and that's where me and the atheist community essentially separate, is because me as an atheist, having roots in Christianity, I was raised in Christianity, but I saw the Christian church. I worked for the Christian church as a treasurer for 2.5 years. I saw the corruption, I saw the greed, I saw the nonsense, I saw the absolute cheating, lying, swindling, and BS. And then I also saw it on a national scale when we were in the Church of God, which is headed by the Church of God Association from Anderson, Indiana. And when we went to the national conferences to talk about all this stuff and measure numbers and all that good stuff, it was the exact same thing.
Hold on one sec. We need to do a sound check. We've been getting a lot of comments saying that there's no sound. So we'll see if, on my end, I guess they can hear you okay? I'm not sure. Now we're not getting any response. Well, at least we'll have a good conversation.
Yeah. All right. But with me being at the Church of God through the head of Anderson, Indiana, I saw that on a national side where it's just absolutely atrocious. These people were lying, cheating, swindling, and just taking advantage of people. And the church that I came from was like a church of maybe 30 people, where 90% of it was over the age of 70. That church is essentially dead now because they're all dead. Mm-hmm. But they all just took advantage of it. They basically used their checkbook to basically cash out the idea that they're guilty of any wrongdoing or sin. And where the atheist community looks down at their nose of these kind of people, but they look down at, and it's such a broad stroke that any and all Christians are bad, any and all Catholics are bad, any and all Islamic Muslims are bad. Like, they're just flat out wrong. And I find that there has to be something, and this is where I find myself not, like, if I'm ever veering in the way of God at all, it's going to be in the lines of a deist, because more often than not, yeah, I don't think he has a lot of stranglehold or influence of what we're doing. but he's probably just sitting back at this point because there's nothing that is leading me to believe that he's influencing people on a daily basis, especially not to the degree of what we're at.
Yeah. As the cosmologist said to Napoleon, I have no need for that hypothesis, sir.
Yeah.
So let's bring it back to Jordan Peterson now that we apparently have the sound issue fixed.
Cool.
We're talking a little bit about religion. One of the big claims that Jordan Peterson, that people make about Jordan Peterson, is that he's bringing people back to God and to religion. This is one of the claims that I used to make to people who were not as familiar with him. And he does have these long biblical lectures, and he does seem to be bringing people in, and yet a lot of theologians and religious activists, not least being Robert Barron, say not so much. And so, and looking at his rules, beyond whether they, illustrate a higher power or not, you can see either goodness or evil in certain principles. It's one of the things I like about C.S. Lewis's book, Mere Christianity, is he opens it with an argument about how there are some things that we know to be morally true without appealing to rational self-interest, and sometimes in opposition to rational self-interest. It would be good to represent myself here, but I know I shouldn't, and I don't know why. Some inner voice is telling me, don't do that. So Socrates' daemon, in a way. And so that's the foundation, and I think that's really all that's necessary to judge something on morality. We can construct theories of morality in order to extrapolate from those principles to cases where the morality of an action isn't exactly as obvious. But for basic moral questions, we know intuitively. And this is one of the things that Hitchens brought up. And so when you read Peterson's 12 rules for life, let me read them right now. 1 is stand up straight with your shoulders back. 2, treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping. E.g., why won't you just take your damn pills? 3, make friends with people who want the best for you. 4, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to someone else, who someone else is today. 5, do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. 6, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. 7, pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. 8, tell the truth, or at least don't lie. 9, assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't. 10, be precise in your speech. 11, do not bother children when they are skateboarding. And 12, pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. Now, I don't know about you, but intuitively, all of those seem perhaps a little simplistic, but overall solid and morally good bits of advice. But the problem that Vox Dei tries to highlight is that when you actually read maps of meaning and delve into Peterson's peculiar definitions of words like being and truth and chaos and logos and things like that, which don't necessarily coincide with Heidegger's definition of being, or the traditional religious interpretation of logos, or the classical philosophical meaning of truth, whether that's identity or coherence or whatever, you get a completely different meaning from these rather straightforward appearing injunctions. And so Vox Dei compiled his list of translations that create a coherent worldview that seems to match up with what Jordan Peterson is actually saying in the content of the chapters, not just the chapter titles. And so let me read through those real quick. Stand up straight with your shoulders back. Translation, be mediocre. 2, I'll just read them. God is the balance between good and evil. 3, leave the wounded behind to die. 4, your head is the only true safe space. Now, I actually took issue with Vox Dei's thing. I don't think Peterson is saying that. 5, do not excel because excellence endangers the balance. That goes back to our sort of Jewish IQ conversation.
Yep.
6, inaction is always preferable to action. So one of my biggest criticisms of not Peterson, but the Peterson fan base is the tendency to descend upon a critical video and say, your room probably isn't even clean. Like, really, guys.
Yeah, I always had a personal issue with the whole keep your room clean thing.
I actually think it's excellent advice, and it's very good psychological advice. But if you are going around telling everyone else to clean their rooms, you're totally missing the point. You're completely ignoring the actual rule in the most unself-aware, ironic fact. But anyways. 7. To reach heaven above, you must descend into hell below. 8. You can speak a new world into existence through your lies. 9. Dominate the conversation and control the narrative by keeping your mouth shut. 10. Transcend the material world and very carefully choose the words that will alter this reality. 11. Heal the world by assimilating its evil. And 12. To lift the world out of hell, you must be willing to accept its pain and suffering into yourself. Now, these don't sound very charitable. They sound a little. They almost sound like they're reaching in places. But part of that is. Sorry, go ahead.
There's one that really sticks out to me that I really is. Did you or Vox Dei write this?
This was Vox Dei's.
Okay.
I'm just giving Vox Dei's. I'm just listing Vox Dei's translations.
Okay.
And I took issue with number 4. But
I will give him credit, and I find that this is going to be one of his hidden gems. Okay. And the reason for it, I remember his debate with what's his name, the Dyson, I think it was the black preacher.
Oh yes. Oh my God. That.
God, what is his name? I can't remember his name.
Michael Eric Dyson or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. I remember really, really well when they were in the conversation. I believe it was number 10. Be precise in your speech. Translation: transcend the material world and very carefully choose the words that will alter this reality. Okay. I think he's starting to really get into this kind of repetitive point that I see him going into over and over and over again in multiple interviews. There was one that I heard him on the radio, and there's as well as one over when he was in Britain, as well as this Michael Eric Dyson guy. And it was when he's talking about when has the left gone too far. And you and I would agree that that's a really good point to bring up. When does the left go too far? We know when the right goes too far when you start talking about ethno-nationalism, from his perspective at least, that ethno-nationalism is pretty much when people start to go too far. And I don't think it's necessarily ethno-nationalism, but moreover that ethno-superiority based on only your inherited race or ethnicity itself.
Well, I have to side with Barry Goldwater in this one and say that an excess of virtue is no vice, right? An excess of liberty is no fault. And the question is not where have we gone too far or where have we not gone far enough. The question is what is true and what is good, and what is the accurate balance. Now, the reality of politics, of course, is that there has to be some compromise. That's just that, but that's not philosophy. That's political science. And this idea that the ideal is a balance. Well, that might be true. It's good to balance your tires, but it's not good to have a balance of arsenic in your diet. It varies on context, and balance is not. It can be a good thing, but it's not an intrinsic good.
You're right, but I will say that the left can go too far when you are trying to implement socialism and communism and trying to create an equality of outcomes. Same thing with the right when you're trying to, institute forms of fascism, whether you believe fascism is actually a right-wing idea or not. I'll take it in this context because apparently Webster now defines it as a right-wing ideology.
Forgive me for interrupting. I believe it is right-wing, and I think the people who try to say fascism isn't really of the right are like, you're missing the point. But the more relevant point isn't that socialism goes too far to the left or fascism goes too far to the right. The relevant point is that socialism doesn't work and it's wrong. Fascism doesn't work and it's wrong. It doesn't matter if extreme this, or maybe it's not extreme enough if you're Julius Evola, but it's
Yeah,
just
and that's
wrong.
my point. And that's my point is when he's talking about this kind of thing, is when I'm kind of getting at is the whole be precise in your speech, transcend the material world, and very carefully choose the words that will alter this reality. Is he's being, I will say that he's being disingenuous, and I've gotten irritated with the way he's arguing as of late, because he's talking about when does the left go too far? Exactly. I want it to be precise. And that kind of dismissal, especially from a philosophical point of view, when you're trying to be absolutely precise in your speech to that degree of when does the left go too far, that's an impossibility to actually muscle down. Mm-hmm. And in that case, you're starting to try to switch the argument, and not only the argument of you're also trying to switch and alter the reality and how we actually perceive the left versus the right. And that's where, yeah, I will give Vox Dei this. I will give him this list. I do have a disagreement with, like, number one, the whole be mediocre with stand up straight and your shoulders back. Yeah. I disagree with him on that one personally. Not number four. I agree with him on the whole compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today, or your head is the only true safe space. I'll give him that one personally. But okay. The whole stand, and I'll finish this and then I'll let you go. The stand up straight with your shoulders back. That's, if you read the chapter, it's mediocre at best. Like, it's a good chapter, don't get me wrong, but it's moreover like, how do you want to be presented and how do you want to present yourself? You can only attempt to be perceived in a manner in which you present yourself. Okay? But you can't dictate how other people will perceive you.
That's true. Yeah. It's interesting because my review of Peterson's book wound its way to the R. Jordan Peterson subreddit, apparently, and one of the commentators, Therasex, says that those aren't actually all that bad interpretations. What's wrong with being mediocre at something? Most of us are actively terrible at everything compared to others in the world, which we're increasingly aware of thanks to technology. I mean, I tend to take JBP at his word and assume he means what he says, which is something that Vox Dei doesn't seem willing to do. Now, hold on a second. If you're willing to grant the list, and that includes the granting that truth is not what you believe it to be, and lies are not what you believe it to be. So why would you take JBP at his word if you're granting the list and taking JBP at his word that truth is saying things that are expedient to your survival and success? So it's a little inconsistent there. But they are granting the list. And regarding the lobster and whether standing up straight with your shoulders back means to be mediocre.
The fucking lobster, man. God. The lobster and cleaning your room is the worst fucking thing he could have ever said. That dominates every conversation.
Honestly, I despite being on Vox Dei's side on this, I still have a soft spot for the room cleaning as a piece of sound advice. And I actually have a soft spot on the lobster just purely from a rhetorical perspective. And I think that's why it's become so prevalent, like a catchy pop song that you can't get out of your head or off the radio. It's so vivid and visceral. He says, like, 60 million years ago. It's like, that sticks. We're dealing with arthropods who have a similar thing. Now, Vox Dei thinks that actually we diverged from lobsters so far back that it's actually biologically sketchy to try to make neurological comparisons. I don't want to weigh into that debate, but as far as the first rule goes, does stand up straight with your shoulders back mean mediocre? The argument that Vox Dei makes is that because being at the bottom of the social hierarchy sucks, you want to rise up. But if you rise up too high, say to the top 10th percentile, you'll be in a position to tyrannize over others, and that creates even more oppression. So the ideal is actually not rising to the top, it's rising to the middle. It's similar if you've read Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power, which I hope no one mistakes as a moral document, as a Machiavellian guide to success. The first law in Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power is don't outshine the master. Similar principle that here, I think. But whereas in Robert Greene's book, I think everyone reading it immediately and obviously gets the sense, and I think Robert Greene says himself in the introductions, like, this is not a moral book. This is it's not an immoral book, it's an amoral book. What are the rules that guide people's rise to success? And with Peterson, I think people take it not just as moral, but kind of as religious in a sense. And so my favorite philosophers are people like Robert Pirsig and Matthew Crawford. And the ideal for them is, and to a degree Nietzsche as well, the ideal for them is always excellence and competence and pursuing this high ideal that you can never achieve in its absolute nature. But you get better by pursuing this ideal of perfection. And pursuing the ideal of mediocrity is not how you get to mediocrity. It's that just excuses staying where you are, which goes with the whole idea of inaction. So I think, returning to the idea of our moral intuitions, when I read the list of translations, which a lot of Peterson fans grant as, yeah, that's pretty accurate, that doesn't strike me as a moral or a good list. No matter how good I think the chapter titles, untranslated and taken in a regular English vernacular, are good bits of advice.
All right. Now, I would like to question one more thing, though. So, and this kind of relates a little bit to Jordan Peterson and Vox Dei, but I really kind of want your opinion on this. So, you and I have spoke. I think it was last time you and I were on here. You and I spoke regarding. I would never want the rest of the United States, and I'm going to say the United States. I wouldn't want the rest of the world to be like me. Okay, I don't think, and this may be sucking my own dick a little bit, maybe a little bit of a sense of moral superiority. That may be the case. Feel free to criticize me as you see fit, especially anybody in the comment section. Feel free to criticize me as you see fit. I'm a piece of shit, I know. With that being said,
we're talking about Vox Dei here. If you're going to say something arrogant, you're not. You're already in greater company. So.
And Jordan Peterson. Yeah. So, with that being said, being an atheist, I would never want the rest of the United States to be like me. And the reason for it is because I do not believe that the vast majority of the population has the moral sense to actually do the right thing when no one's looking, or do the right thing in general. I think without a sense of direction, a sense of God, or a sense of kind of listed out rules, either through the 10 Commandments or 12 Rules of Life, Antidote to Chaos, whatever rule set that you want to follow, I don't believe that the rest of the population would be able to actually exist in a capacity that's useful. I don't think we'd be able to go anywhere. I don't think we'd be able to get anywhere. I think we would start to destroy ourselves faster than we already may be doing.
I don't think that's dick sucking at all. I think that's absolutely accurate, and I think it's one of the reasons that Jordan Peterson's philosophy is. A lot of people say, well, he may be wrong about this, he may be wrong about that, but at least he's helping people. I don't think he is. I don't think that Jordan Peterson's philosophy is helpful for this reason. In Christianity, you're told to believe in basically an all-seeing God who maybe doesn't see everything, but he knows your heart, and he knows how things turn out. What Peterson is saying when he says tell the truth or at least don't lie is don't say things that will make you feel like you're coming apart, and say the things that will help that will help you survive and succeed. Now, if you tell that to an intelligent person who has a long time preference horizon, well, they don't need to hear that advice because they already know that, and they can see the connections already. It's like, oh yeah, I'm not going to lie because I know that will break down the trust or whatever, even if it gives me a short-term advantage in the moment. But yeah, who are the people who need this advice of not lying the most? It's the people who don't have long time preferences, who can't see cause and effect patterns, and who are like, oh yeah, I'm going to lie about this thing because it'll help me out in this very moment, never mind what the consequences of that will be. Well, if that person is going to gauge their own honesty based on whether it helps them, and again, think about what their time preference is like, and whether it makes them feel guilt or shame, well, being honest might feel a lot more shameful for them, i.e. feeling like they're coming apart than telling a lie in that moment. And so it's not helping precisely the people who need the help most. And as you point out, people who have that moral sense and that long time preference and causality, maybe they don't need supernatural religious beliefs in the way that people with a longer time preference, that with a shorter time preference do. But Peterson's is almost the opposite. It's like a superfluous guide for the elite who are already doing these things. And it's an unhelpful, possibly even hurtful philosophy for those at the bottom who need it the most, at least as far as truth-telling is concerned.
I think he kind of, you remember how a lot of people criticize him for, like, basically being the alt-right, besides Milo being the alt-right poster boy or being the alt-right's philosopher?
Oh, he is not just not alt-right, he doesn't believe in group identity of any kind.
I know. He's a radical individualist, I know. But that being said, like, he kind of wrote 12 Rules for Life. It sounds like he kind of wrote the 12 Rules for Life for the lowest common denominator. And it's really disheartening because I've heard a lot of his speeches. I've heard a lot of his kind of his lectures online. I've actually sat and watched quite a bit of it. I am personally a fan of Jordan Peterson. I think he's got a lot of good ideas because I think it's what he's doing overall. I think he's doing more good than bad, but not the amount of good he thinks he's doing.
Okay.
And especially with the amount of, like, putting the attention on God. There's a lot of people who did focus on God a lot. I think the people who are watching a lot of the Christian verses, and I think a lot of the Christian videos, I don't think they're doing that for a let's come to God kind of reason. I think they may be doing that more in the lines of trying to see it more of a, because the people who tend to watch Jordan Peterson are doing kind of philosophical inward looking, like trying to become a little bit more self-aware, trying to become a little bit more intellectual. And I think the people who are watching the Christian videos are not necessarily trying to come to God. I think they're trying to figure out the reasoning or the theological backing behind his arguments.
Right.
And I don't see a negative side to either one of those necessarily, but I don't think what he's doing when he's trying to go to the lowest common denominator, you're trying to bring everybody up to a point that I don't think people are wanting to go to, and I don't think it's reasonable to expect them to do so.
Well, here's the danger of the former, the generation of this internal monologue that it seems like a lot of people don't have, right? A lot of people, my wife was reading a Psychology Today article that was apparently, the study was claiming to find, and I'm a little skeptical of this, but the point might still be interesting. It was claiming to find that something like 40% of the general population does not have an internal monologue. They're not thinking about what's going on. They're not having a conversation with themselves about their surroundings in the way that intelligent people and do. And for a lot of intelligent people, that's like they can't even comprehend not having an internal monologue. But there's a danger to the internal monologue and to being too introspective. And you can see this with Hamlet, for example, where you have the Prince of Denmark is just absolutely paralyzed to inaction by his constant self-questioning and man, I'm struggling with this question. And it's exactly what Jordan Peterson is both doing and advocating for other people to do, too. The idea that you should not criticize the world unless you have your house perfectly in order, your room perfectly in order. Some of the most extraordinary heroes had notoriously messy rooms. I mean, one of the reasons I was attracted to Jordan Peterson in the first place was because he was saying a lot of the same things that Joseph Campbell was saying. And I still like Joseph Campbell a lot. Joseph Campbell had a famously messy study. There was not an empty space on his desk. It was so full of crap and papers and stuff. Winston Churchill, same thing, you know. You may disagree with some of the things that Winston Churchill did, but you cannot say that he did not, that he wasn't a great man in the classical sense of the term, that he didn't accomplish extraordinary things. And so the idea that you have to have your room, and the steelman case for this would be to say, if you don't know where to begin, start with your room. But that's not how Jordan Peterson frames it in the book. He says, don't you dare criticize the world. What right do you have to criticize the world before you go out? And he's echoing Job 38, where the voice from the whirlwind saying, where were you when you laid the world's foundations and all that.
Well, I think, and this is where I was talking about like the whole lowest common denominator. I think he was looking at speaking to a very specific audience when it comes to that chapter. I think because one, he teaches college students, and second, he's also been around a lot of the college students and a lot of the younger generation, where he's trying to, instead of appeal to people who are a little bit more firm in their ways, these people are more ideologically pliable, and especially moralistic. And so I think when he's writing that, he's trying to appeal to young people where it's like, listen, before you try to get up and change the world, you might want to just make sure you have your own shit in order before you like literally destroy yourself in trying to like input socialism and social justice and all the other shit. I think I think he may have gotten off kilter a little bit and focused too heavily on that, thinking that he could hit the mass appeal when it's pretty obvious that he's pointing it in a very firm direction towards the younger college age crowd. Probably because of what he's been witnessing as of late. I mean, he does teach college kids, and he's seen this wave of progressivism hit the college campuses. I mean, you were around UW a lot.
Yeah.
I obviously graduated from UW. It's a festering shithole more often than not when you're talking about any kind of political ideology outside of the realms of social justice.
Yeah.
And there's very few teachers there. There are a couple who are absolutely phenomenal at saying, listen, you don't get to dominate a conversation just because you don't agree with them. And they really keep people in check, and it's fantastic. I even actually made a trans friend named Dom. I don't know how to actually say it because I'm terrible at this, and I don't really. But it's a female turning into a guy, so I don't know which trans one you would call that.
It.
Yeah, it, I guess. The thing is, really cool. Dom is a really cool person. Don't get me wrong. Dom and I disagree on a lot. We agree on some things, but what we are finding ourselves in is that talking to each other outside of the whole group think is a lot more productive than trying to do it where there's a lot of people in the classroom.
Oh,
in which these structured lectures where they have like this group discussion kind of set built into the classroom. I'm dead serious. This happens a lot. There's a lot of classes like this where it's literally just a professor and he gives you something to read, and then we come into the class and literally just discuss that for like 90 minutes, and everybody essentially gets a chance to talk and discuss this. It's incredibly unproductive. It's useless. It's absolutely useless because one, you don't actually share a lot of people's opinions. You just hear one thing out of the side of your ear because you're barely listening to them, and suddenly you completely shut down because you just hate that person and they're the most awful human being on the planet. And that happened to me, and I think you've met Mark. I don't know if you've met Mark yet. He's a buddy of mine who went to UW with me. It was rampant. He and I agree on a lot of things. He's a lot more red pill because he's a French citizen as well, and he's like on the Matteo Salvini kind of side where he's like, I want to kick out every single migrant out of France. I don't fucking care where we put them. I don't care if we have to put them in jail first. I don't care if we have to drag them kicking and screaming. Like, he doesn't care. He is done watching his home country go to shit. But when we would speak about anything that would be left wing, right wing, independent, it didn't matter. It was suddenly what you say is because of who you are is wrong.
Yeah.
End story.
Well, and I think that
Jordan Peterson, when he's trying to go after this, he's trying to go so hard into this young crowd He tried to do mass appeal and pointed at that young crowd, and he missed on both ends.
Well, I think the problem, though, with that format, and it's interesting that you describe this format as being so incredibly unproductive, because on the one hand, I know exactly what you're talking about. I was a proud non-graduate of college. Actually, that's not true. I did get a 2-year degree, but I got accepted to Western twice, and both times was like, yeah, fuck that. I'm going to go off and drive a truck or join the military or whatever. I don't have a 4-year degree, and if I did, I wouldn't be particularly proud of it, at least not as proud as my wedding ring or my black belt. You know, those are much greater accomplishments in my own opinion, because of this culture at college and at universities that seems to, because it's not just a fear of being socially ostracized by your class. That might be the most immediate fear, but there's a very real kind of pseudo-legal fear where you can be expelled or taken to task in an official capacity for saying something that is offensive. And everyone walks around with this kind of dark cloud over their head, and they have their umbrellas up like, oh man, I just don't interact, don't say anything. Because in contrast with your experience, when I was in high school, a much more kind of open, free-spirited place compared to college, I took a course called Theory of Knowledge, which was sort of an introductory philosophy class. And it was exactly this kind of format where we were sitting in a circle rather than the normal rows, and we just hammered it out with each other about what we thought about Plato's Cave or this film or this song. And it was one of the most productive classes I had in high school as far as my own intellectual development went. Now, there were some other things going on at the same time that helped as well. But the contrast in my experience between the productive and unproductive classes has less to do with that format and more to do with this kind of culture of fear and this us-them mentality that is sort of an inescapable part of human nature. We all break ourselves down into us and them. But if you're breaking yourself down into us and them, as far as like war teams in your own classroom, something's wrong. And you're not going to have a very productive philosophical conversation there. And I feel like I don't even want to call it a problem, it just is. But one of the effects of all this social justice versus, and it's really turning into internationalism versus nationalism again, is that it's breaking us down into sides for a war, in my opinion. And how can you have a productive conversation with someone who you're enemies with? You know,
and when you're getting set up for war, you care less about the conversation and more along the lines of how to situate yourself on what side that you think will win.
Exactly. Yeah.
So and yeah, it's kind of miserable. I almost passed. Oh God. So you remember when I bought you Jordan Peterson's book, right?
Yes.
Okay. So just for shits and giggles, everyone, yes, I did buy Chris's book. But
he's not alone. I'm sure Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life is probably not just the most popular and best-selling book, but probably the most gifted book, you know, among friends and family and stuff. Because it's a self-help book that's almost religious and philosophical, and it gets a lot of people interested in philosophy, which is kind of interesting.
So, but I think the book that I actually probably passed out as gifts more than any other book ever besides the U.S. Constitution, because I hand that out like it's like it's gum, is actually Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals.
Speaking of Machiavellian amoral guides to power, as we were talking about before.
Yeah. So I mean that's actually what I would pass out more often than not, is because I adhere to a lot of Saul Alinsky's principles and Rules for Radicals. I know he was actually a communist, but not a communist.
But you know why that is? He was being true to his own rules. The whole idea of freezing and isolating someone and attaching them to a group, guilt by association, he was making sure that he couldn't be tied in that way. And that's what not to keep tying it back, but that's what Jordan Peterson talks about with not being a nationalist, avoiding the pathologies of group identity. It's just a way of protecting yourself.
Yeah.
It's a way of not being tied in with that. And I wrote something rather critical of Gavin McInnes last night, who just quit the Proud Boys yesterday in response to the FBI labeling them as extremist group. I don't like this whole don't associate yourself with anything. That's the way that they attack nationalism, by the way. So they say, oh, nationalism is pathological, but more than that, it opens you up to criticism. Say, oh, you're a part of this nation. Well, this nation did terrible things in the past. You're guilty of that too because you're a part of that nation.
Hell, if I could, I would join Steve Bannon's movement.
Yeah, well, and it's it's as if all of these successful people take on a kind of preemptive posture of irony. And in Peterson's case, it's not humorous, it's not ironic, but there is a kind of preemptive detachment and objectivity that doesn't allow for real connection. And David Foster Wallace wrote about this. There's an excellent essay he wrote called E Unibus Plurum, which is about the effect, the cultural effect of TV and irony on culture. And irony is an immensely powerful tool for protecting yourself, or at least it used to be. Nowadays, it's not so much, because they don't attack you for being for something. They attack you for not being sufficiently for social justice, or whatever the case may be. There isn't protection in irony anymore, because they'll attack you for not swimming with the school of fish. But
that's something you and I have talked about before, is the purity test.
Yeah. But the point is,
but that's why I bring up Saul Alinsky and why I give it out so often, is because I think it's incredibly important to really focus on Rule 4, and I would do that in my classes all the time, which is make your enemy live up to its own book of rules. I would do it literally almost every class, and sure enough, they still don't know how to counter that. They really don't.
Well, I'll tell you what the counter to that is, because Rule 4 sounds like a very good rule, just not even as a strategy and a tactic, but just as a general rule is, you should try to live up to your own standards, and you should hold your friends up to their standards as well in order to help them become better forms of themselves. So it sounds like Saul Alinsky is just helping you be your best self or whatever. But of course, no one does that. And I think that the way to counter that is what many nationalists are increasingly doing, which is that if you are not a member of our group, you don't have the right to hold us to our standards. That's for us to do with ourselves. You are outside our us. You are not one of us, and therefore your motives are suspect. And that is what is exactly true of Saul Alinsky, is it not? He knows he's doing it with ulterior motives and to undermine the group rather than to help them. Whereas if other people are helping you, holding you to your own standards, but are inside your group, they're doing that to help you. And so if someone is outside of your group, then they don't get to hold you to your standards. Because the only way that they can hold you to your own standards is by appealing to your willingness to allow them that right. Oh, it's your own standards. Yeah, shut up.
But that's the thing, is that only works in something that you genuinely believe in. And the vast majority of the people we are fighting today, which I would say are the globalists or the social justice warriors, whichever one you want to call them. If it's the radical left, it's the globalists, the party of Davos, as Steve Bannon would call them. Whichever side of the scale you're arguing against, which they're not really actually in line with this point of view. They actually don't believe the vast majority of what they're espousing.
No, they don't.
They're talking about shit, but they've never thought it through. And if you haven't thought it through, you actually can't genuinely believe something.
That's why the globalists are rejecting the social justice warriors. And that's what Jordan Peterson is. He's the globalist. He's the turning point where the globalists are saying, social justice helped us out so far. Now we're throwing that aside.
Yeah, and for people like you and I, where you and I are pretty firm in our stances, like we're ever evolving, don't get us wrong, but it's only evolving in the manner of which we know how to better think and describe of how our mentality is. Right. We already are pretty set in our ways, not because we're repulsed by other ideas or repulsed by differences in opinions. It's the fact that we have found a philosophical grounding that not only makes sense logically, spiritually, but also philosophically. And when we are looking at all of those encompassed, it's really hard to knock such a sturdy foundation with something that has no foundation whatsoever.
Yeah, and the sort of dovetailing off that, I suppose an answer to some random ironic, John Stewart out there, knocking on and mocking and finding internal contradictions in your worldview, you can say, well, what's your proposed alternative? And my criticism, this sort of goes to my criticism of Gavin McInnes, because Gavin McInnes was saying, oh, it's all about Western values. But he always seemed to leave that, and I have to admit, I haven't read Gavin McInnes a lot, but his repeated, consistent emphasis on Western values always struck me as an evasion. Because what are Western values? That's a huge subject of debate, and there's no consensus on what those are. He's like irony itself. He's choosing something that's amorphous and that can change, and that he can. It's not something that he actually has to defend. It's just an evasion, and not something real. And so the mark of, I guess, people like you, or like Hitchens, or like Vox Dei even, is that you may disagree with these people, but there is something concrete to disagree with them about. Should we have gone into Iraq? Yes or no? Should we become Christian? Yes or no? Is atheism more logical than Christianity? Yes or no? Those are all, concrete and, dare I say, falsifiable claims. Those Western values, or this ironic, ever-attacking stance, is not. You have to be able to defend something. And at the bottom of Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, there's no conception of what is good. There's only a conception of what's expedient. And, that raises my hackles a bit, as much as I respect it. And you have to respect it because it is effective.
I'll give you that. But I find that it's important because whenever I argue with that side, I almost find it necessary to give them a cheat sheet. It is. It's because I know pretty much how I'm going to argue. I know what I'm going to say to them almost, because they use the exact same talking points, same arguments every single fucking time. It gets incredibly irritating to that degree. But if I give them a cheat sheet, I know full well that they're going to go, oh, shit. Then either one, I'm going to dismiss this and continue talking about the same crap over and over again. But I might get that onesies and twosies who might go, wow, now I know how to beat him. And then they actually might go a little introspective and go, how can I defeat him, and start to be a little bit more logical in their approach. Because there's nothing that irritates me more than bad arguments.
Oh yeah, yeah. I would rather argue with an intelligent person and lose than just trash some novice, because that's just a waste of time.
It is. It is an absolute waste of time. There's nothing worse than bad arguments. And don't get me wrong, I have my fair share of bad arguments, and I still have a lot of bad arguments on quite a few things. I think there was one you pointed out was my ideal on pro-choice. I think that was you. I can't remember if that was you.
Regardless of whether it was or wasn't, I approached a pro-life table once with a smug kind of smirk of, oh, I'm gonna just casually and politely just trounce these people in debate. And I was so confident in myself. I walked up to these. At the time, I was the leader of our school's secular student alliance. We call it the Atheist Community of Bellevue College. And I was like, oh, so what are the arguments for you guys are pro-life, you're against abortion or whatever? And they said, yes, that's our position. And we chatted for a bit, and I asked them, like, well, why is it, not okay? And they said, I don't even remember exactly how it went, but they said something that was very clear and straightforward and very polite. And I realized, wow, I don't have a response for this. And so I said, let me think about that for a while. And I walked away, and I did think about it for a while. I'm like, they're right. God damn it. I don't have a response to that. Now I hate to even give him credit for this because I hate the guy so much. But I think Richard Spencer was right when he said that most Americans think that abortion is a terrible thing, but it's not always the worst thing in every case. And I don't have an argument to justify that intuition, but I think there's something to that intuition, and that in some cases you could make a moral case for abortion. I know it's like one of the philosophical favorites for discussing morality, but I'm not sure.
Who was the one who used the argument of 1,000 embryos versus one 5-year-old child? Who was the one who used that argument?
I'm not sure.
You know which one I'm talking about, right?
The main one I'm familiar with is the tiny violinist fastened to your bed or whatever.
There was an argument a little while ago. It was on the side of abortion. It kind of reminds me of that. Is if you ran into a burning building and you could only save one, which one would you grab? The 5-year-old girl or a vasque of 1,000 embryos?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you could, but the thing is, you could make that argument and say, which one would you grab, man A or man B in a burning building? And whichever one you pick, the answer wouldn't justify murder of men. And the argument that they make is that, regardless of which one you would choose, 1,000 embryos or a 5-year-old child, perhaps you'd choose the 5-year-old child. And it's like, wow, you're just murdering 1,000 people. Clearly that illustrates something about your conception of the degree of life at work here. But that doesn't mean that there's no degree there at all.
And that's what it's trying to illustrate. It's not to try to say that you're an evil person or anything. It's literally just saying, like, you're, like, you put this degree of, like, if you're pro-life, 1,000 lives should be better than one life. But then, of course, then we have to get into the sociopathy and psychopathy kind of argument, whether or not you're a psychopath or a sociopath. But like, let's put that way to the side because that's not even part of this argument. But they do lend credit to it, but it's a bad argument in general. Because I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's the fact that just because the more often than not someone is going to choose the 5-year-old child because you can actually see emotion in that child, in which case you can empathize and sympathize with that child's danger or fear of danger, comparatively to like an embryo that you can't see anything regarding any kind of an emotion for. So obviously more often than not someone's going to choose the 5-year-old girl. I still think it's a bad argument, and it irritates me to all ends. But that's what I keep hearing. But my bad argument, I remember you kind of criticizing me on it.
Well,
so
possibly we've talked a lot about various things. I don't recall.
Mine was the idea that basically the child is like, so pretty much if at 29 years old I'm not married and I don't have any legal documents stating otherwise, in which case if I get into a car crash right now at the age of 29 and I don't have anybody else imbued with the powers through legal means, the person who's automatically brought in to decide whether or not I live or die to pull the cord or not is my mother. That's by law is the de facto decider in your life, unless she's not available, in which case it would go to your father or your next relative. In which case, that child, and I give that to the conservatives, this is a child at conception. It is. It's the simple logical argument of going all the way back. Well, if it's at 20 weeks, what about 19 weeks? What about 18 weeks? What about 17 weeks? Right. So logically speaking, yes, it's absolutely a child. That's an easy logical understanding. On the other hand, what to do with it is, since that child is not in a capacity to make medical decisions on their own, it is therefore up to the mother to make the decision of whether or not to terminate its life, whether it be age 29 or at age 3 months still in womb. All right. So therefore, legalistically speaking, unless you're going to erode the law to the point where you get rid of the de facto deciding role of the mother, which you're free to do, more power to you. You can try all you want. Unless you're going to go into that, there is a legalistic ideal or legalistic mindset as why we should be pro-choice, legalistically speaking. Maybe not morally, but legalistically speaking.
So the answer to that has come up recently, and I don't remember the exact story, but there was some Western country that was talking about, I kid you not, they were literally calling it like postpartum abortions or something like that. Straight up infanticide. Because if you accept the premises that it's the mother's choice, as it would be in your case if something were to happen to you and it's like your mother's choice to pull the cord or not, there's no argument left against just straight infanticide. And the idea is, I think that the only way you can get around that problem is to say, well, you know, the mother is the caretaker and the guardian of this child, not just legally, but in that sort of higher law, natural law sense. She's its mother, you know, but she doesn't own the child. And the idea that it's her choice, she can do as she pleases, basically, as many feminists like to argue, my body, my choice. It's like, if we are granting that this is another life, maybe not a full human life, but a life to some degree, then it's not really your body. And you don't get to do with it as you choose. It's up to your best judgment what's in the best interests of that child. But this child doesn't belong to you, you know? I mean, in a sense it kind of does, in the same way that husbands and spouses in a sense belong to each other, and parents, but parents as much belong to the child as vice versa. I would argue perhaps even more so, because the child is in many senses the genetic future of the parent, but they both belong to the lineage and are accountable to the lineage in a way that they would be accountable to their boss at work or to any other contract of that kind. And so the idea that it's it's just the legal right of the mother to make her own decision. It sort of goes back to the point you were bringing up before about how morality is not derived from the law. It's the other way around. And just because we de facto appoint parents to be the guardians and caretakers and guides for their children, because that's just how nature made us, doesn't give them the right to do anything at all, just because they deem it to be right in their opinion at the time, whether that's sending them to a Catholic priest for private training of some sort, or having their penis sucked off by a mohel, or killing them before they're born.
Really hard about that comment earlier.
Well, it's part of our conversation. It's always I was told by my wife I need to bookend my arguments more because they tend to meander a lot. So
I do the same thing. I think that's what brings you and I together so much. We can trail off into like 5 hours worth of conversation. It wouldn't matter because we'll hit every single topic that we can think of. So don't feel bad. I'm sure even anybody who's watching right now, they're like, Jesus Christ, this is not even to do with Jordan Peterson anymore.
Nothing to do with the book at all. I suppose we should talk about that a little bit more before we go. I have to hit the restroom in the next 10 minutes or so, or bad things will happen. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so actually before we go back to Jordanetics, I did want to question on one thing, and this is like a recent news issue. I don't know if you've heard this. So Hillary Clinton is in the news.
Talking about running for president again?
No, God. Well, I think she might, but God, that would make me smile. That she was talking about that Europe has to curb immigration to stop right-wing populists.
Yeah, that dovetails with what Jonathan Haidt has been saying. My friend Eli Harmon pointed this out, how the new left-wing trend, of which Jordan Peterson is a member of this trajectory, or of this group, but Jonathan Haidt really makes the strong case for this. He says, you know, this left of center liberal, international, sort of urban morality is a great thing. It's a wonderful thing. But there's psychological diversity, and there's people who have a right-wing disposition. And if we go too fast, then it will create a backlash that will undo all of the great internationalist, liberalist work that we've done so far. So he says what we need to do is not stop, but we need to slow down. We need to turn our boilers back a little bit and accelerate at a little slower rate if we want to keep this frog in the pot. And so that's, in theory, why Jordan Peterson has been working with the UN, why he was in Slovenia this last weekend at some internationalist Davos man-style conference talking about, whatever it is he's talking about. And I think that's where Hillary Clinton is coming from, because she is absolutely a part of that. I don't even think it's fair to call her a liberalist or a liberal of any kind. She's kind of not anything. She's just she's the party of Machiavelli, I suppose.
I don't consider her a party. I consider her the party of Clinton.
Yeah,
it's set out for her own ends, and she will utilize. If it was more advantageous for her to be a Republican, she'd be a Republican.
Yeah, but she's invested as she is with the DNC and the Democratic Party, and that's where they want to go. And I think Clinton is beginning to lose control. Like, she is becoming their tool rather than the intended reversal where they were her tool.
Yeah. So, anyways, the reason for it, I was actually going to talk about the idea of Europe changing too fast, the United States changing too fast, and I believe it was Zakaria. What's his name? Something Zakaria. He's on CNN.
Fareed.
Yeah, thank you, Fareed Zakaria. He actually was talking about pretty much the same thing. I actually have to agree with him 100% on this. It was probably one of the best things I've seen from CNN in a very long time, which was that, yeah, the demographics of the U.S. has changed dramatically within the last 20 years. Same thing with Europe. In which case, there can only be so much change one generation can handle in that time frame. Okay? In which case, is this blatant push for immigration and integration, is this happening too fast, and what are going to be the destructive purposes, or what is going to be the destructive ends of it? And the reason I was wanting to bring this up is not because I wanted to divert from Jordanetics, is about bringing it to full circle of what Jordanetics is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Is potentially what I got, and again, I haven't finished Jordanetics, I apologize, so this may be a leap. But criticisms, I'm taking a lot more from his blogs on Jordan Peterson than his book.
That covers most of the content in Jordanetics.
Okay, so it is the idea that with Jordan Peterson being inherently dishonest, or at least unintentionally dishonest, with this kind of change worldwide, outside of the philosophical realms, what kind of a political actor do you think that Jordan Peterson can play in the near future regarding the change of nationalists versus globalists, or nation states versus the party of devils?
Well, I think Jordan Peterson's political purpose is quite clear. He's been rather outspoken about it. And the reason he got into politics and everything in the first place was because of his dreams of doom and his nightmarish fear of a third world war, a nuclear war. And his whole purpose has been to try to stop world war. Now, I remember in one of his lectures, he was talking about mutually assured destruction, how stupid that was and how insane that was. But the thing is, mathematically, it's not insane. It's actually very effective, peace by deterrence. And what was so frustrating about it was that he got that point, he nailed it in his conversation with Camille Paglia, where he said that kind of mutual deterrence is what makes conversations between men sincere. So he gets the point, but as soon as nukes get involved, it's, for some reason, all bets are off, and he goes full Heinlein, like, we need world government, in order to to protect ourselves from nuclear war. I'm sorry, that's exactly what caused the first two world wars. Is this and the Peloponnesian War that laid its foundation, where the Delian League became the Athenian Empire. And Sargon has actually done a very good job covering that and explaining how that all went with people. And I think the UN is just absolutely craving to become the Fourth Reich, because only a fourth the United Nations.
You cut out just a tad. Who is trying to become the Fourth Reich?
The United Nations.
Okay.
Are just chomping at the bit to become the Fourth Reich, because only a fourth German Empire will stop another world war. And I think that that's becoming a very popular and chic kind of politics, is more globalism. And they'll say, oh, we're a globalized economy. It's already here. There's nothing we can do about it. The Greek economist and not prime minister, but economic advisor or whatever, who was on the Rubin Report a year or so back, said something similar. Oh, Britain should never have joined the EU, but they did, so now you can't get out. It's like, yeah, we can. Yeah, they can, rather. And I think that nationalism is the better path to peace than internationalism. Empire is what causes these wars, not nationhood. And nationhood and empire are not the same. If you look at Hitler's Germany, for example, or the German Empire that preceded it, maybe that's a better example. That was Austria, Hungary, North Italy, part of Poland, Bosnia, and like parts of 3 or 4 other countries, all mixed together in one multinational empire. And when you have that kind of cultural and national divergence, you have to be more totalitarian and more authoritarian in order to make everyone get along with each other.
Thus the United States being a nation of laws.
Right. Well, and also, to a degree, or once to a degree, a nation of relatively independent states. Now, that's not true anymore, and now we have a lot of conflict over the influence that California and New York have on our politics. And there's actually a lot of resentment and internal conflict over the tendency of Californians to flee from their home state, which they have so completely ruined, and then try to bring those same politics and cultures to the new states that they moved to. It's it's a microcosm of what's been going on for thousands of years. And I think that Peterson's role, and I think he's being authentic in his and sincere in his goal of trying to stop the next world war, of trying to bring about peace and stuff. And you can see this particularly in this chapter about cleaning your room. Don't dare criticize the world unless you have your own house perfectly in order. He's got this. He talks about Karl Panzram, and he talks about the Columbine shooters, and how these the pathologies, not just of group identity, but also of kind of disagreement generally. This condemnation of the group. Well, I'm sorry. Different nations have different ways of doing things and different cultures, and it's part of who they are. And if you abandon those and say, well, I'm not going to criticize attacks on those things until I get my own house perfectly in order, well, then you have a recipe for the destruction of nations through dilution and just destroying the incentives to leave a legacy, which is, I think, where things are going.
I agree. All right. Well, I think that's a pretty good solid note to leave off on. I know that you have to excuse yourself.
Indeed. Well, we'll have to do more chats like these. Thanks so much for coming on, even without having gone through the book. I know it's hard to talk about a book without having read it, but fortunately, he wrote most of the book before he wrote the book. So,
which helps. I've read a lot of his blogs, and so it helped a little bit.
Yeah. So, but before I take off, I guess I don't know. I would recommend Jordanetics to most people, whether you're critical or a fan of Jordan Peterson. And because if Jordan Peterson ultimately is right, then I think we're both being free speech advocates. I think that his correctness would withstand this kind of criticism, and if it doesn't, then you are smarter for it, hopefully.
I don't know if whether or not I'm supposed to recommend it or not. Like, am I supposed to put in my opinion, or?
Well, if you'd like, do you think it's worth the read, or do you think it's better just to read the blogs and watch the dark streams?
Including the fact that I haven't seen or I haven't completed the book, I think it would be misguided of me to give an actual official recommendation. I do think that since you actually stated that the vast majority of the book is covered in his blogs, I think if you are a supporter of Vox Dei, I would recommend buying it because obviously the proceeds go to him and you want to support him financially.
Make up your mind if you don't support him.
I'm going in a pragmatic kind of way here.
Yeah. Well, and also if you don't have $7 to spare, then it might be better to read the blog too.
There you go. But if you don't really support him, if you don't really like him, if you want to be more of a critic to him, I would recommend sticking to the blogs, because more often than not, that's going to give you the vast majority of the information. Because almost everything that I read in the first about third, maybe a little more than a third of the book, that was all covered in blogs. So
yeah,
just FYI, I would actually love to read to the end of it simply because of what you were talking about, Scientology and everything. Though.
Well, just wait till the part where he talks about William Butler Yeats conjuring and sending a vampire after Aleister Crowley. It gets pretty intense at the end.
All right, I look forward to it, man.
Hardcore stuff. All right, take care. Thanks for chatting.
You too. Thanks, buddy.